So 2 weeks ago, I was with a team of people down in Florence, Colorado, just outside of Canyon City, and we were in a maximum security prison. And, we spent all morning there, several hours. And on one of our breaks, Rodriguez comes up to me. And see, Rodriguez has been an inmate in this prison for well over a decade. And he comes up to me, he says, "Pastor, do you remember those 2 questions you asked us last time, those 2 really hard questions last time you were here? Who are you and why are you here?" I said, "Yeah, I remember." He said, "Well, I can't get those questions out of my mind, and it's all I think about, but I think I'm getting closer to being able to answer those questions." And then Rodriguez launches into his story. And he says, "When I came in here, I had just made a mess of my life, a complete mess. And it was like everything I touched on the outside, it would just crumble. And I hurt lots of people along the way, including my family, the people that I love most." And he said, "When I came in this time, some in my family, they said they didn't want to see me anymore. They were done with me." And he said, "I'll never forget that day, right before I came in, when I had to look my 4-year-old daughter in the eyes and tell her goodbye, and I knew how long it would be before I'd see her again." See, and then Rodriguez, he started to get a bit lighter. And he said, "But Pastor, God is changing my heart and God is changing my life, and I know there's people who aren't going to believe that because of the mess I made, but I've been working this program, and you see these 95 to 100 guys that we're working with, there's a few requirements along the way for them. They all have to be getting out of prison within the next 3 years, and they're all working this program of where they're owning their wrongs. They're cleaning up their side of the street. They're owning all the times they hurt people, and they're going through an amends process and forgiveness, and it is some powerful, powerful stuff." And he said, "Things are happening in my life that I could just never dream of." And I say, "Like what?" He says, "Now, Pastor, I'm getting out of here next month, don't you?" I said, "No, man, I didn't know that. Congratulations." He said, "My daughter was 4 when I came in, and she's 15 now. And I haven't spoken to her." And he cracks a big smile. He says, "Until last week." Puts his hands on his hips. His chest starts to come out a little bit. He says, "You know what she called me?" "No, what'd she call you?" "She called me Dad." "You know what she said to me?" "No, what'd she say?" "She said she can't wait for me to get out of here so that we can spend some time together." He says, "Pastor, do you know what a gift that is? You know what a gift that is?" I say, "Yeah, actually I do. Actually I do. I have a 4-year-old. And he said, "Man, that's why I'm here. I mean, not why I'm here, but that's why I'm here, so that I can finally be a dad to my little girl." Whew. And see, the session was getting ready to start back up, and they have some pretty strict rules when the session starts up. Everyone's got to be seated and quiet. So Rodriguez goes and sits down, and I sit down next to Tammy. My wife, Tammy, was able to come with us on that day as a guest, and she said, "Who's that?" I said, That's Rodriguez, and he gets to see his daughter next month." Those moments where your heart just wants to leap out of your chest. Those moments where you can't help but sing a new song. Those moments where you are completely overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, that was that moment for me. In more ways than one, that was that moment. And this is about reorientation. And when it comes to Psalms of reorientation, they always consist of these 3 things. They recall the past, but they don't stay in the past. And they come to the sudden realization that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves, and they experience new life as a surprise that always evokes gratitude. And you see, when you arrive at this maximum security prison, as a guest anyway, you go through this security. And then you enter into a door, and that door closes behind you, and it's another room of security. And then you go outside of that door, and you are in this huge, very open prison yard, much like you would see in the movies. And this huge, very open prison yard, it's surrounded by razor wire and towers. And I have to tell y'all, it is just a bit disorienting. And it serves as this very poignant reminder that if you want to get to the reorientation, you have to go through the disorientation. And you see, on the other side of disorientation, there's a group of guys that I've grown to love. There's a group of guys that have opened their hearts in ways that we don't often encounter. And you see, without the disorientation, we don't get the reorientation. Without the disorientation, I don't get Rodriguez's story. Without the disorientation, I don't get the deepest sense of joy. You see, it's true, isn't it? We got to go right through the hard stuff if we want to get to the good stuff. So this morning, what I want to do with you is together read Psalm 30. It is a beautiful psalm of reorientation. And I want you to keep these three things in mind as we read: that they recall the past but don't stay in the past. They come to the sudden realization that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And they experience new life as a surprise that always evokes gratitude. Are you ready for this psalm? Psalm 30. It's got 12 verses. Let's read. I exalt you, Lord, because you pulled me up. You didn't let my enemies celebrate over me. Lord, my God, I cried out to you for help, and you healed me. Lord, you brought me up from the grave, brought me back to life from among those going down to the pit. And let's pause there for just a moment, because the psalmist here is just giving us a bit of an introduction. In case we might miss it, he's saying, listen up, this is a psalm of reorientation. I've been brought to new life. Something has happened, and I'm going to tell you about it. Verse 4, let's keep going. You who are faithful to the Lord, sing praises to him. Give thanks to his holy name. His anger lasts only for a second, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay all night, but by morning, joy. And let's pause there for just a moment. Are you seeing what's happening? Recalling the past, but not staying in the past. There is a season for weeping, and joy comes. Verse 6. When I was comfortable, I said, I will never stumble, because it pleased you, Lord. You made me a strong mountain, but then you hid your presence. I was terrified. I cried out to you, Lord. I begged my Lord for mercy. What is to be gained by my spilled blood, by my going down into the pit? Does dust thank you? Does it proclaim your faithfulness? Lord, listen and have mercy on me. Lord, be my helper. You changed my mourning into dancing. You took off my funeral clothes and dressed me up in joy. Let's pause one more time. Ego, pride, arrogance. He thought he was on top of all of it, and then the whole thing crumbles, and now he is proclaiming, it wasn't me, but God who brought me into this new life. Because God always does the rescuing, the saving, the recovering. It's that moment where you realize that God is doing for you what you could not do for yourself. And here's how he closes it. So that my whole being might sing praises to you and never stop. Lord, my God, I will give thanks to you forever. It's the surprise of new life. And it always evokes the deepest sense of gratitude. Have you experienced this? Is Psalm 30 your story? And you might be saying, well, you know, Ryan, I've never been an inmate in a prison, and I just don't have a story like that. Well, good. You don't have to have that story. In fact, I would encourage you not to have that story. But what's your story? Your story of reorientation. I mean, haven't you experienced these moments? These moments where you were deep down in the pit. Disoriented, you didn't know up from down. Completely disconnected from the most meaningful things in life. And yet, a new day emerged. And you don't know exactly how to describe how it happened. You don't always have the words for it. But you know you are filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. And when you look back at these moments, you say, of course God did this. Of course God did this, because I could not pull myself up from that pit. I tried. I couldn't work myself out of the pit. Of course God did this. I could not have created this moment. It's those moments, like the psalmist said, where you felt your whole being singing a new song that you could give God thanks forever. See, we have to tell this story. We have to tell the story, because if we don't speak it, if we don't acknowledge it, if we don't tell the story, then we might miss it. We might completely miss the power of reorientation. I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago a scholar by the name of Walter Brueggemann. He's an Old Testament scholar. He's done much of his scholarship, spent much of his scholarship in the work of the Psalms, and here's what he says. The collection of the Psalter, so he's talking about the Psalms, the collection of the Psalter is not for those whose life is one of uninterrupted continuity and equilibrium. Such people should stay safely in the book of Proverbs, which reflects on the continuities of life. But few of us live that kind of life. Most of us who think our lives are that way have been numbed, desensitized, and suppressed so that we are cut off from what is in fact going on in our lives. My brothers and sisters, do not allow yourselves to be cut off. Don't allow yourselves to be numbed and desensitized and suppressed from the very deepest parts of your story. Tell this story. The pain, the joy, the new day. Tell it. All of it. You know, I remember when I was first asked to share my story of recovery at a 12-step meeting. And man, I was scared to death. I had shared this story before, but never in this kind of format, getting the whole thing together and trying to make sense of it and make it coherent. And so I said yes, but then after I said yes, I had time to think about it, and I went up to the guy and I said, man, I don't even know how to do this. I don't know where to start. I said, I need some of your wisdom here. And he said, oh, it's easy. Just tell us what it was like. Tell us what happened. Tell us what it's like now. Huh. Kind of like the Psalms of reorientation do it. You know what it was like? This is the act of recalling the past, but not staying in the past. I mean, y'all know what I mean? It is easy. It is way easier to tell the story of disorientation than it is the story of reorientation. Because when we get to reorientation, we have to reflect and we have to figure out what happened. Oh, it's easy to tell you about the war field and the battle wounds and the battle of the bottle. That's easy. But we can't stay there. We have to then say what happened. What happened? It's that second part. What were the things that happened to get you to see that God was doing for you what you couldn't do for yourself? Again, it's that moment where you say, God did this. Why do I say God did this? Because I know what it's like to try it on my own. I know what it's like to be deep down in the pit and try to climb out of that thing by myself. It doesn't work. I tried it. This was an act of God. And by the way, you want a really boring, uncompelling story? Listen to someone who starts telling you about how they did it on their own, how they built it, how they did it. They just pulled themselves up and they did it on their own. It's boring because you know when it comes to disorientation, you can't think your way through it. You pray your way through disorientation. You surrender your way through it. You community your way toward reorientation. See, and then there's that third part, what it's like now. And when he said this to me, when he was telling me what it's like now, he said, you know, Ryan, there may be someone new in the room, and you want to speak to them. He said, we don't just want your wounds. We want your healing. I mean, this is when you get to speak the surprise of new life. Express the gratitude. I mean, tell the story of your healing. And yes, I'm speaking to you all right now. Tell the story of your healing because you never know who that's going to help. You never know who you're going to help when you tell that story. Is Psalm 30 your story? Is reorientation your story? You might say, well, geez, Ryan, you know, I've never really battled an addiction, so I don't really have a story like that. Well, good. You don't have to have that kind of story. I hope you don't battle addiction. What is your story of reorientation? And how are we telling the story of reorientation? How are we telling the story of the new day, the healing? Because the world is craving this story. The world needs this story. And we see it everywhere, don't we? I mean, we don't have to look very far to see stories of reorientation, stories of healing. You know, I was just reading an article yesterday. Did you know there's a garden, a healing garden that has been developed right in the heart of the city of Las Vegas? Volunteers came together this week and worked around the clock. And you know what they did? They planted 58 trees to remember and honor the 58 lives that were taken from this senseless act of violence. And the volunteers said, we want this to be a place where people can come and heal. That, my friends, is a story of reorientation. And we see stories of reorientation right here in this community all the time. I mean, you can tell these stories just as much as I can. The stories of the Stephen ministers who walk with people, journey with people through their disorientation towards reorientation. Or the story of the numerous support groups that meet right here in this building, all throughout this building, every day of the week, because they know the power of walking with people through the disorientation, proclaiming that a new day is possible, proclaiming that healing truly is possible, and we're going to walk through it with you. Or how about the mission trips? The mission trips to Guatemala, Africa, other parts of the world, the local experiences. And do you know what we hear all the time? The stories of people coming back. And they say things like, man, I thought I was going to serve them, but this thing started happening inside of me and it profoundly changed something in me. And I was reconnected from things I didn't even know I was disconnected from. I experienced things in a new way. It's powerful. And how about when it comes to natural disasters? Things like hurricanes. Man, this community just starts scattering around, telling stories of reorientation in the face of disorientation, just like we saw last weekend, filling up a trailer full of food that's going to feed hurricane victims in Houston, filling up another trailer that's going to stocked the shelves of 2 local food pantries here in South Denver, raising money, cash, close to $40,000 that will go directly to UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, which will then go directly to those victims who are in need. Man, that is a story of reorientation. My friends, where are you experiencing reorientation? And remember these moments. Hold on to these moments. And my goodness, tell the story. Tell the story of your reorientation. And if you're going through a time of disorientation, find people to journey with. And you might say, man, I just don't have anyone. Let me ask y'all something. If you're willing to journey with people through disorientation, would you just raise your hand? Keep your hand up a minute. If you're going through disorientation, will you just look around? Talk to these people. I know them. I know many of them. They wouldn't raise their hand if they didn't mean it. Talk to them. Find people to journey with. So at this time, I want to invite Patrick and Jack to come forward. They're going to sing a song. Some of you know this song. It's called Simple Man. Have you ever heard of the band called Lynyrd Skynyrd? Sometimes you just got to bring a little Skynyrd into the church. I want to tell you just a brief synopsis on why this song was written. The frontman of Lynyrd Skynyrd, Johnny Van Zant, his grandmother died, and in that same week, the lead guitarist, whose name is Gary Rosington, his mother died. And they got together in his apartment on that evening, and they wrote this song. It was the quickest amount of time they had ever written a song. They said they wrote it in under an hour because they gathered together in their apartment to tell the stories of their mom and grandma and how these women had shaped their lives. And then they began to sing about it. And so it's a story of reorientation. And here's the thing about reorientation. It always holds the power and the ability to sing orientation in the face of disorientation. And that's what this song does. And we are in a new day with the whiteboards. We are transitioning to reorientation, so we have green. We're done with the blue markers and the red markers. We have green markers. And as they're singing, I want to invite you to move, if you would like, and to pick a word or a phrase or a simple image, something that reminds you, something that speaks reorientation to you. So at this time, I invite you to move.